Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you for our third hour. Chris Hedges on the line. We heard from Christopher Hitchens in the first hour. His book out in paperback, God Is Not Great. The flip side of the story, Chris Hedges, When Atheism Becomes Religion, the new and paperback edition of his New York Times bestseller. The hardcover had a different title, didn't it, Chris?
The hardcover was I Don't Believe in Atheists.
There you go.
My publishers hated.
Yeah, and I think when atheism becomes religion, it's been one of my mantras for a number of years. I think good job there. Truthdig.com, by the way, where a lot of Chris's stuff is written, and in fact your new piece Resistor Becomes Serfs, I'd like to get into with you. But first, let's just kick around this religion issue for a moment, if that's all right with you. You're asserting that aggressive atheism, or that actually, why should I say what you're asserting? Give us your elevator speech.
Well, I graduated from Harvard Divinity School, which is probably swell the ranks of atheists more than any other seminary in the United States.
Why is that?
Well, because it's a very academic environment, one which takes critiques those who have critiqued religion extremely seriously. I mean, even people like Nietzsche, who was this bizarre mixture of brilliance and insanity.
Yeah.
And there's an understanding that all of the great religious reformers, including Martin Luther, were in their day condemned as atheists and heretics. Spinoza. You can't be a serious student of philosophy and theology without looking at writers like Camus. So I actually
even Jesus, if you want to get
What's that?
Even Jesus. And the Baal Shem Tov was not all that popular among Jews of his day,
Yeah. Oh, yes. In terms of certainly being condemned as a heretic, no question about it. And so, but when I was fairly predisposed to atheism until I started picking up these books by Hitchens and Harris and Dawkins and Dennett and everyone else. And so, and I'd just come off spending 2 years writing about the radical Christian right in this country in a book called American Fascists, the Christian Right and the War in America, and saw how they had just replicated the belief system of the Christian right through the language of scientific rationalism. And you can just check
for
off
example.
the list. Well, a binary worldview of us and them, a philosophical system which at its core is about the elevation of us above others, placing us on a moral plane, not because of Jesus, but because of the glories of Western civilization, and externalization of evil. Evil is always something out there. These human impediments to evil have to be eradicated. A linear concept of time, the idea that we are moving towards that moral evolution, collective moral progress is real. The anti-intellectualism. We don't have to read anything about religion. We don't have to study Islam because our belief system is better. The embrace.
A lot of these things, though, Chris, are things that are just endemic. They're wired into our culture. I mean, the sense of, for example, that moral standards are increasing over time. I mean, we one of the things that Americans love to do is congratulate ourselves about the fact that we ended slavery. We now have an African American president. Women can now vote. Look at how far we've come. Science. Look at all the progress. Blah blah blah. If you're not informed of things like the Iroquois Confederacy, it seems like, gee, the whole world has just come so far. But that has nothing to do, I don't think, specifically with a religious worldview, does it? Or an atheist worldview, for that matter.
Well, the atheists embrace it, and so do the Christian right. That is a peculiar concept of Hebraic and Christian theology, this idea of time as linear. Most religious belief systems, whether the ancient Greeks, whether Asians, see time as cyclical. It's about
Confucius, not Confucians, Buddhists see time as cyclical, or perhaps as chaotic. And the Hindus certainly talk about the yupas, the periods of time. But even the Hindu cycles of time, the 27,000 year cycles of time in Hinduism, are always striving toward an ultimate perfection.
Yeah, but there's an idea that individuals, like societies, have a period of maturation growth, degeneration, and decay.
What if they do?
Well, I think they do. I think that's a much truer concept of time. The idea that we are progressing, that each generation is sort of taking one step closer towards perfection is, I don't think anything in human history or human nature bears that out. And you talk about progress. Well, yes, of course. I mean, we have scientific, technological progress. But, you know, these are morally neutral, and they serve the ambitions of human beings, both for the good and the bad, the light and the dark. And that's why the 20th century was one of the bloodiest in human history.
Right.
The very technology that we trumpet as a sign of our evolution is destroying the ecosystem that sustains the human species. So are there gains? We have an African-American president, of course, but societies like individuals make moral advances and they make moral reverses. The idea that we are the culmination morally of what came before, I think, is very dangerous, and that is embraced by the new atheist movement, and it's embraced by the Christian right, by all fundamentalists.
So what about, you know, the concern I have, frankly, with both the approach that you're taking and the approach that Christopher Hitchens is taking, is that you are both, to some extent, painting the opposition, shall we say, with a very, very broad brush. There are a lot of very rational atheists who I would, you know, semantically splitting hairs, call agnostics instead of atheists, but you know, who are not subscribers to a fundamentalist ideology. And there are, just as there are many Christians who are not subscribers to and Jews and Hindus and Muslims and Buddhists.
And that's why I began by saying that, you know, I'm not an enemy to atheism. Well, I'm an enemy to this brand of atheism.
But this brand represents a very just like the crazies in Islam and in Christianity represents a very, very small number. I mean, they may seem large because they're all over the press, but they're very small.
Well, they've dominated the discussion of atheism, and I find what they're promoting to be very frightening. And I'm very
How
clear.
so?
Well, the whole idea, it's utopian, their vision.
But so is your Christianity.
No, not mine. I mean, you know,
So you discard Revelation? You discard the idea, you know, Jesus' assertion that he'll return?
Yeah.
You discard the idea of salvation and heaven and all those things?
Yes. And you know, there's no shortage of morally indefensible passages in the Bible, Revelation being a pretty good one.
Right.
You know, the Gospel of John, you know, the liberal churches edit this stuff out as assiduously as the Christian right. The Gospel of John is filled with anti-Semitic rants.
Sure.
Homophobia in Paul, Yahweh blessing acts of righteous genocide in Genesis. I mean, you know, I'm sorry, you just can't read through the Bible, and there's plenty of morally repugnant passages in the Bible, and I can quote them as a former Divinity student probably better than most critics. The idea of a heaven and hell and anthropomorphic God, I don't buy any of that.
So I think maybe we're coming to an agreement or a confluence of thought here. We're talking with Chris Hedges, by the way, truthdig.com, his writings, his new book, When Atheism Becomes Religion. Chris, how do we, those of us who consider, and perhaps there's a hubris associated with this as well, but nonetheless I'll say it, how do those of us who consider ourselves the rational middle on this thing, who acknowledge the transcendental and the numinous, the divine, in some way, and yet don't want to buy into fundamentalism either that pushes away all religion or that says that there's only one and one way? How do we spread that gospel without becoming the toxic force that we're trying to avoid? And I'm sorry, we only have about a half a minute here.
Well, my anger at the new atheists stems from the same anger I have to the Christian right, because they're seeking to delegitimize my tradition, which is pretty much the tradition that you just summarized, anti-utopian, a belief in our own imperfection, and understanding that there are other ways of being and believing that are just as legitimate as our own, some of them not based in religious structures at all. And
Chris, can you stick around for a few minutes?
Yeah.
Great. We've got to take a break here. The machine starts and it runs. It's no way around that. We've got to stimulate the economy. But we will be back in about 3.5 minutes, and we'll continue our conversation with Chris Hedges. truthdig.com for many of his writings, his new book, When Atheism Becomes Religion. And I also want to get into this new piece he wrote, Resist or Become Serfs. We'll be right back about the economy.